Diagnosing and replacing the front spring and top bearing on a Jaguar X-Type 2 litre diesel. If you get somebody to sit in the car and turn the steering wheel with the engine running from lock to lock, observe and listen to the top part of the strut inside the engine bay. If you can see it juddering, or you can hear knocks, like here in this case, suspect a broken spring for the sudden juddering knocks. And if it's a louder juddering, binding or snapping feeling, when you turn it, it's liable to be the top bearing. Usually when a spring goes, it's pretty customary to replace the top bearing at the same time, if it's been on the car a number of years, as a faulty bearing can contribute to breaking the spring anyway, so it needs to work. If we look under the gap where the wheel arch and the tyre is, you should be able to just see the strut, and if I zoom in with my camera with a light on, I can just see at the end of this strut is a broken piece. Just get my hand in. There we are, that's broken. They very often break at the end of the springs, like in this case. I'm surprised that hasn't fallen off actually, which is another danger if you're on the road. A piece of spring could fall off and do some damage, or at other times the spring will fall off the strut mount and jam the wheel under the arch, or even puncture in the tyre, and you wouldn't want that to happen on a motorway. First thing you want to do is look down at your front wheel, put your wheel straight of course. Take the centre cap off where it's the Jaguar logo with a little flat bladed screwdriver, quite a thin one, and just hook it at the side and it just pulls off. Then you want to be releasing the hub nut. You're just breaking it loose before you take it off while the wheel's on the ground, as these are quite tight and can take some shifting. So spray them with plenty of penetrating fluid, leave it a while and then spray them again. The nuts are 32mm hex. And you'll need a long breaker bar. I'm going to use a scaffold pole on a 90-degree extension. Try not to use an ordinary wrench, as they're not really designed for such high torque loads and you might break it. As you can see, I'm putting quite a bit of torque on this and it's not shifting. Have another go. No, and my bar's hitting the ground. These are really tight. I have to put it at a different angle. I'll move the socket, I think. That's better. I have to keep it nice and square onto the nut and be mindful of the car's bodywork. That's it. Got it. So you just want to loosen it off about half a turn, as the weight of the car is on the bearing and you don't want to damage that. So now you want to jack up the car and take the wheel off. Locate the arrow on the plastic outer sill cover and put the jack on the actual seam, which is behind that, just here. First break the wheel nuts loose before the tyre's off the ground, and then jack it up enough so you can get your axle stand underneath. And from what I've read, I'm not going to put my axle stand in the usual spot on this sort of subframe at the front. As they say, you should drop the subframe down to do this job. You have to lower the subframe down about 30mm so it won't damage the lower rear hydro bush, just here where these bolts are. Put something down on the ground to protect yourself while you're doing the job. I've got this old rug that my Auntie Mildred lets me use on a Wednesday and Thursday while she's out shopping. So which is this hydro bush that I'm talking about? I presume it's this rear trailing bush on the Wishbone, as it's bent at quite an angle at the moment, and if you're going to prise it down even more, as I said, it might damage it. There is a bush on the subframe though, but I don't think it's that. Anyway, I will have a go at dropping it, as it doesn't look too difficult to do. Just undo a couple of bolts. Hold on, there's some bearings on the floor here. Let's have a look at the strut. Oh, here we are, the bearings all wrecked. All the ball bearings have come out, it's all dried up. So the spring's not seated onto the bearing anymore, it's seated onto the turret, which doesn't help. So I'll have to compress the spring a little bit to get it out. Or I could cut it with an angle grinder, but that'd be a bit dangerous. If I wasn't doing this for YouTube, I'd probably do that, but I wouldn't recommend it. I've got to present the correct method to do it correctly, otherwise the health and safety goblins will be coming after me. So that's the top part of the spring broken off and got wedged down at the bottom. Right, I'll start by taking the caliper off first. If we look round the back of the caliper, there's two hex bolts that are holding the caliper on to the hub. So we need to break those loose and then take them out. I'll spray them with some penetrating fluid first and just leave it for a bit. Spray onto the bolts and then the gap between the caliper and the carrier. The bolts are 15mm hex. When I took the bolts out, I realised I should have only just taken one out, the top one first, which enables you to prise the caliper off the disc first before you take the bottom one out. In doing so, you don't put any strain on the flexible brake pipe, like I did here. But no worries, I think it'll be alright. Then we need to tie the caliper up, and the best spot to do this is the bracket at the back, holding the flexible pipe on. That way you can take the strut out easier. I'll just take the rubber pipe out of this bracket here that's attached to the strut. You just push it backwards towards the body. Slide the disc off, then detach the ABS wheel sensor. You just push down on this little clip and then pull back. You might find a little screwdriver will help with this. Slide out the ABS cable from the drop link bracket, then clean up and spray the top drop link bracket nut, and clean out the centre Allen key part on the shaft. This is also 15mm hex. Break that loose. Then if the shaft rotates, stick an Allen key in the centre and use a ring spanner to take the nut off. To take the spindle out, you'll have to bend down the anti-roll bar arm slightly with a bar or a big screwdriver in my case, and then push out the link. Move that to one side. Now the front ball joint, just clean that up and spray it again. Clean out the centre Allen key hole and undo it. It's a 15mm hex. But these do vary depending if it had a new one or not. Some might be a slightly different size. Make sure it's firmly on. That one's come off quite Right, I'm just going to put the nut back on to knock the tie rod out, which protects the threads while you just knock it, but don't knock it too hard. No, that's not coming out, so I'll get my ball joint splitter tool for that, which will make it much easier. Here it is. They're quite good, these. As you can see, it's quite heavy duty, and you just slide it on and then turn the bolt. Quite tight is this one. Yep, they can be quite tight. There's no way I'd knock that out with a hammer. You can of course heat the hub up as well as a last resort, but that's best kept as a last resort, in my opinion. Right, I'm also going to take these bolts out, as I said earlier, just to lower these front subframe down a little bit to save this bush that I talk about. The rear bolts that I'm taking off now are 13mm hex. Oh right, and I better, before I move any further, I'll just mark the plate so it goes back in the same place. I'll just scribe round the edge of various bits. Wants to drop about 30mm. Yeah, it'll pull down a bit more, I think. If it needs to do, I can just take that bolt out if I need to do that. The bottom ball joint needs to come out. It's held onto the hub with a pinch bolt. This is a T55, which you'll probably only need when you put it back together with a new bolt. And on the other side is a 18mm hex nut, which you want to clean up first and put some penetrating fluid on. Let that soak a while. And take the bolt off. When I take this nut off, you can see quite a bit of corrosion at the base of the bolt where it meets the hub. So it might be difficult to get this out, so I'll put some more penetrating fluid on that. And as it's a pinch bolt, it pinches the hub together at the back where it's split. It's a bit hard to see, but there's this metal cover plate that's put in between that covers that gap to stop water and getting in. So I'll bend that back and then put some penetrating fluid in and let it soak for quite a few hours before I attempt to get the bolt out, as I've heard reports of these bolts seizing up completely. So hopefully mine won't be so bad, and just dousing it in penetrating fluid will work. So I get a large lump hammer like this and give it some nice firm blows, see if you can get it out. Mine's going okay, but I can't get it out easily. I'll drift it out. It's a M12 bolt, so if I use a smaller bolt, something like an M10, then drift the remaining bolt out. The bolt's about 55mm long to the base of the head and is M12 coarse thread, 1.75 pitch, 8.8 tensile, and the nut's a flanged locking nut, and you want to fit a new one of these. Moving on to the hub again, we'll just take off the nut this time, now that we broke it loose before. Should be fairly straightforward. Put that to one side, and I've ordered 2 new ones for this. which is always the recommendation. Looks like the drive shaft splines are rusty, so I'll put some fluid on those. Now we've got to get the ball joint off the wishbone at the bottom. And I've heard on the internet that this is quite a difficult job, but I'll give it a go and see what happens. As the pinch bolt held the ball joint onto the hub, we need to insert a wedge to open it up a bit. But I tried a number of chisels and ended up with a short flat-bladed screwdriver, which is the only thing I could get in that would actually make a purchase. And it was still hard to knock it in, as you haven't got much space around the back. So I first used a large, old, heavy-duty flat-bladed screwdriver, which started to move the hub off the ball joint. So it was looking hopeful. So I tried that for a bit and penetrating fluid. And more penetrating fluid. And I found I could lift the ball joint out about halfway, but then it seemed to get stuck. So then I found an old chisel and tried using both the screwdriver and the chisel together to give it more purchase. But it wasn't budging, so I kept persisting. Here's how far I got the ball joint out. You can just start to see the recess where the pinch bolt went, and there seems to be a bit of rust on it. So as I couldn't bend the wishbone down any further, I decided to use a jack and lift up the hub from the wheel flange after putting the car in gear so it didn't rotate. So I lifted it up about an inch and tried again. This should be enough to release the ball joint, surely. No, it didn't make any difference. So I think I need a bigger bar. So I started using a piece of scaffolding, a put lock, along with a chisel. All it did was knock my screwdriver wedge out. So I have to put that back in again and try again. I kept trying for quite a bit with this and got fed up, so I decided to put some heat on the hub to expand it, which wasn't that easy. I didn't want to damage the CV boot or the rubber on the ball joint. Right, I'll give that a go, knock all these wedges in. It's not budging at all. So I put the ball joint back in and tried a few times again. And all it did was seem to go about halfway and then stop. And tried lifting it up a bit. Different angles and different bars. Then I started to think there's something wrong with the alignment here. So I angled the jack onto the flange and tried that and got nowhere. I spent hours on this and that's as far as I've got. So I studied it a bit longer and I devised a plan. And I think I know why the ball joint won't come out. But I'll need to order some new parts, which will take a few days. So unfortunately I have to come back to making a part 2 video for this one, as I've run out of time. So if you come this far, definitely check that video out, where hopefully I'm able to get the bottom ball joint out and finish the job off. So I'm off in for my tea, and I'll catch you on the next one. And as always, thank you for watching.